Yeah, but today is gonna be a really different video. I'm going to be making a tier list about Jujutsu Kaisen's domain expansion. I've only selected this template because it has the most famous ones and the most that we could see better, because there are some that we don't know yet, and I'd rather leave those aside because we can have a pretty discussion in the comments. So this is 10 domain expansions that are most known to the fans, and also that they are in the wiki. So basically you can go to the wiki and read how they work. We have our first one being Sukuna's Malevolent Shrine, which I'm gonna put in S tier. Not because I'm a fanboy of Sukuna or anything, but just because of the domain's properties. He can basically choose what angle and what part of the being side the domain will be cut. Basically, he can choose if a person is going to be cut on another side of the domain. All that depends is Sukuna's will. Different other domains, he can basically choose if someone is an ally inside the domain or not. Then we have the fact that its range is really big. Of course, this is about the user himself, but it is a good statement that his range is really powerful. Then we have Gojo, which I'm gonna be putting on A tier. Why on A tier and not on other places like S tier? Well, his domain is one of the strongest domain, if not the strongest domain on the series. He basically can one-shot a person or thousands of them inside the domain, and when the domain is activated, he can act free will, he can move, he can basically put, different than Sukuna that has to be stuck in place. Then we have another problem. The fact that he cannot choose if a being inside the domain is an ally or not. He cannot basically say this thing won't be hurt because his domain is just too strong. That's the whole thing with Shibuya. Everyone thought that Gojo would not use his domain, but he did. Only for a fraction of a second, but he did. That's the whole thing. Everyone used this weakness against Gojo himself, which of course led to Kenjaku using the prison realm on him. So that's why I'm going to be putting an A tier. It is visually stunning, but also have this really big weakness. Then we have Jogo's Coffin of the Iron Mountain, which I think is an A tier. It is not strong than Sukuna's, and is not stronger than Gojo. But the fact that his domain works with his abilities is a really great connection. He basically can control everything related to fire and magma. The whole domain is on fire and is a volcano. He basically can control anything inside of the domain. Other thing is that the high temperature of it can kill possible ice sorcerers dependent, and machinery like Mechamaru. The fact that it's so hot basically makes a great counter against metal like swordsmen and robots. But it is not stronger than Sukuna because it needs a time reaction. It needs a reaction from Jogo to be an attack, because he can basically make the domain but not act from it, just letting the people inside the domain be hurt. However, if it was more faster, then it would be S tier. Then we have Mahito's self-embodiment of perfection, which I think is a C tier. Why is it on C and not on S or A? Let me explain. Against Nanami, which has a pretty low cursed energy, it is really great. But against sorcerers with high energy levels like Megumi, Gojo, this could turn in the opponent's favor. Why? Imagine using this on Mahoraga, who basically can cut anything. Megumi could destroy the domain with Mahoraga. Other thing is that Jogo could basically make his skin hotter so no one will be able to touch him, including Mahito. And the thing that, of course, everyone was waiting for me to say, which is a weakness that everyone wants, a big weakness, his soul is attached to the hand inside of the domain. So if a hand is cut, it can lead the pain to Mahito. That's why it is a pretty risky domain expansion. It works well, yes indeed, but you have to remember that if it's cut, Mahito will feel the brink. For the next one, we have Chimera Shadow Garden, which I think is an S tier. Like Jogo, the domain adapts to the sorcerer's abilities, but on a more higher level, because Megumi can basically spawn any Shikigami inside of his domain, but there's a catch: it doesn't have a barrier. Of course, enemies could run away, but if Megumi's energy is well trained, he can make a really big domain, tracking anything inside of it, choosing whether or not if it's an enemy or if it's an ally. Other thing is that Megumi himself becomes stronger inside of his domain, just like any sorcerer or any cursed spirit. So, if he makes a domain with no barrier, anything can enter it and basically be stuck, and he will know that it's stuck, he will know where it is, and he can track down and kill it. And we need to remember of his Shikigami. Of course, the wolf and frog and Nue are not that big of a deal, but imagine a Mahoraga inside of it. If Megumi had Mahoraga trained, inside of this domain, it could be deadly. Then we have Dagon's Horizon of the Captivating Skanda, which is basically a beach area that allows Dagon to control amounts of water and fish like Shikigami. This I will put in a B tier. Why on B tier? Although basically the domain works in favor of Dagon, there is a weakness: speed. Of course, speaking, water is faster than the sea of beasts, but against an unknown sorcerer like Toji, this could turn to a giant weakness, because swordsman sorcerers are made to be fast, are made to be precise. Water is everywhere, but it needs a specific precision to start hurting, which of course takes a toll on Dagon's cursed energy available for his domain expansion. Then we have the Sea Beast, which basically can be torn in half by a swordsman. Not all swordsmen can do this, of course, but it has to be considered that it can be destroyed. So basically puts Dagon inside of a domain expansion that could not work against swordsman abilities, just shown in Nanami and Maki Zenin inside of the domain. The next domain is Deadly Sentencing. I'm gonna put it on B tier. Why on B tier and not on A tier if it's a one shot? If the person making the domain is basically a villain, the domain becomes useless, because the creature morals and values are the thing that judges the person accused. Unlike other domains, this one can restrain the abilities of a sorcerer outside the domain. If the user is a bad person, the domain becomes useless. If it's not, the domain can become useful. Just as shown as I'm recording this on 9th of December, expectations of the fans about his domain acting on Sukuna. I sincerely hope that this can become a good thing and not a bad thing inside the domain. But remember, this one restrains the free will of the user. The user cannot become a villain even if he wants to. Then we have Idle Death Gamble, which I'm gonna be putting on C tier. Why on C tier, you say? It depends on luck. Of course, its user, Hakari, is the luckiest one in existence. But if Hakari wasn't that lucky, he would have a lot more problem that he has inside the domain. And need to remember that inside the domain, Hakari is basically all out gambling. All out gambling, all the time, so that something deadly can happen. If not, Hakari is screwed. Just shown as Hajime's abilities inside his domain can become a toll on Hakari if the domain does not work on his favor. And another thing is that, different than Coffin, Iron Mountain, and Combat of the Shadow Garden, if the domain adapts the ability of the sorcerer abilities has to be adapted to the domain, in this case the luck of Hakari. We then have Time Cell Moon Palace from Naoya, which I think, in my sincere opinion, is an S tier. Why it is an S tier and not an A tier or a B tier? Everyone must abide by the 24 frames per second rule, or every cell in their entire body will be attacked of animation frames. Of course, this applies on the user itself, but you need to remember that if the user has a lot of cursed energy, this can make a toll in his favor. Why? The more time that domain is activated, the more the opponent's body becomes fractal. You need to remember that even breathing must apply by the 24 frames per second rule, or else it can become a real problem. I hope this domain has a really good thing on the anime, because if it's not, I'm gonna be pissed off. Then we have Kenjaku's Womb Perfusion, which I'm gonna be putting on an A tier. Different than other non-barrier abilities, this one Kenjaku can say if it is barrier or non-barrier. So basically Kenjaku can control the barrier or not. This is already a big thing. Other thing is that he can blast a target into oblivion, which is 100 effect due to the gravity trick that he's learned. Why it is not an A tier if it's so strong? Considering Kenjaku's other abilities, which is Spiral and the Gravity, this one does not feel as a big thing. It feels more as a bonus. So talking about the user itself, the user will not be using this on a more frequency because it basically doesn't need to. It has other things, it has other ways of attacking the user without needing of the domain expansion. Then we have the most useless to me. This one is pretty useless. Threefold Affliction from Zoro. So fast and so useless. Basically, its mushroom-like appendages flow around in its space. It has a 100% hit rate. However, the user needs to touch the mushroom things to become affected by it. If a person is fast, he can basically dodge all the mushrooms and attack Yorozu, which basically is the weakest person on our planet. Of course, with Megumi's sister's body. Basically, it is a suicidal attempt. The person needs to touch the mushrooms to become inflicted by it. Of course, the rule could be wrong. I could be saying wrong things, but you need to remember that this domain was the least appreciated in the Jujutsu Kaisen, because she used it against Sukuna with Megumi's body with Mahoraga activated, which basically was a suicidal attempt that worked. Yorozu was basically one-shotted by Sukuna. This was the domain expansion tier list. We have other domain expansions that I could work here, but I would not like put in here like smallpox DT domain expansion, because I would need to explain lots and lots of why smallpox is a Jujutsu Kaisen, and that could lead to spoilers. And remember, this was all made spoiler free, so then you could watch it without feeling like, oh, I'm gonna watch this, I'm gonna be spoiled all the thing. You know the techniques, but you don't know how it's gonna be used. This was it. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see you next time.